Welcome to the Business Infrastructure Podcast AI Conference.
Over the next 12 episodes, you'll hear a combination of fireside chats, keynote speeches, and product demonstrations, all centered around AI.
Hi there, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre, host of the Business Infrastructure Podcast, the show where we share operational tips, strategies, and tactics to help improve the way your company operates. We have another great episode lined up for you featuring our AI Tech Conference. This particular episode is bound to be packed with some really useful information that you can use to dramatically improve or transform the way you might be doing something in your back office operations. Before we get started, do me a really quick favor, please. Press pause, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so that you'll know when other episodes come, and then press play and we'll get right into it. I hope you enjoy this episode.
We have a very special guest, our keynote speaker that's joining us, Mr. Dean Hamilton. Dean is the Chief Technology Officer at Wilson Perumal Co. He has owned multiple businesses, has successfully built, scaled them, and sold them. But what he's going to talk to us is more generically about AI and the future of work and how to really analyze your processes to make sure that AI is in fact something that could help you automate, streamline, improve some of your back office operations. So let's go ahead and get started. Dean, welcome again to the show. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me again, Alicia.
Well, this is kind of going to be like a fireside chat. I know I said that you're the keynote speaker, and you are, but it's more of a fireside chat conversation as well. The last time you were on the show, it was so educational, so informative, Dean. You talked very specifically about RPA, which is robotic process automation. I personally learned so much from having that conversation with you. One of the things that I remembered in particular is that you said that RPA is really a continuum and that there are multiple things along that continuum. Am I saying that correctly? So
Yeah,
things
sure.
like machine learning, AI, for example, is also a part of that continuum. So if we could start there, this continuum of automation, if you will, robotic process automation, with AI being a part of that continuum. Can you talk to us a little bit more about why you do describe it as a continuum, and how does AI specifically, what role does AI specifically play as it relates to that continuum?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, RPA can go from sort of very simple automation of repetitive processes, which is, I would say sort of the sweet spot of traditional RPA. So you've got something that you're just doing over and over again. Maybe it's it's what we call a swivel chair application. You're opening one application, you're clicking on a few things, you're cutting and pasting, you're opening another application, but it's a very deterministic, repetitive workflow. And so traditional RPA has lent itself very well to doing that. But traditional RPA didn't, at least historically, lend itself very well to anything that needed kind of like a lot of subjective human reasoning, right? You couldn't reduce it to an algorithm, right? Somebody had to really think about it and maybe make some, lots of exception cases. So there's lots of subjectivity in the decision making. I think where AI starts to kind of come and impinge on that is if you, for instance, have a lot of data, if you've had humans doing that process and the process has been instrumented, so you've been able to collect a fair amount of data about how humans make those decisions, then you can have a machine learning algorithm learn from that data and sort of, and be able to kind of infer the reasoning that the humans would make. So for the part of the process that's very repetitive, you just kind of handle that the old-fashioned way. And for the part of the process that is the exception cases and perhaps needs the human reasoning, instead of like the old AI where you would, basically have to farm it out to a real human, well, you'd farm it out to an AI who would think, who would have basically the reasoning of a lot of humans who have done that work before captured in its model. And, you would give it your whatever you need to ask it, and it would give you your response back, like if you had a human sort of sitting in a kind of a supervisory mode, if you will, over the AI to handle the exception cases. Right. So I think sometimes that's referred to as sort of cognitive AI. And there are all kinds of like weird terms that are being bandied about for how things like AI and traditional automation work together. So don't get too hung up on that term. I'm sure they'll come up with, there's lots of other terms out there. But I think sort of the future is this sort of collaboration between sort of traditional sort of programmatic automation that is kind of doing the highly repetitive things, and then sort of the data science driven forms of automation, which are kind of going to be based on your sort of a machine learning model and an inference engine that can then really do the highly subjective reasoning to do difficult things. Does that make sense?
I think it does, and I'm going to describe something because that's how I'll know if I'm understanding what you just said. So I'm imagining, and for those who are watching us or listening to us right now, imagine you have one of your processes. Let's just say your accounts payable process. So this is, or actually, let's use accounts receivable because we all want to make money and we need to receive money or we won't be in business. So you have your accounts receivable process, which is literally how you are collecting money, whether that be cash, card, check, whatever. If you were to actually map out that process, if I understand you correctly, Dean, there might be certain steps of the process that are highly repetitive. For example, entering information for invoices. That might be highly repetitive. It's something that's done over and over again, depending on the nature of the business that you're in. You may have several transactions within a day. For example, if it's a retail operation or if it's a consulting operation like what you and I both work in, there may not be that same volume of invoices, but it's nevertheless a repetitive task. That might be a candidate for RPA, right? Some type of
sort of traditional RPA or some, yeah.
Okay. But for example, in your process, I like how you and I both use the term the happy path. The happy path of a process is when everything goes according to the way you've documented the process. There aren't any problems. There aren't any exceptions, as you mentioned. But if there is an exception, and again, for those who are watching us, listening to us, an exception in a process is when literally something doesn't go according to plan. It could be that there is a client does not submit or a customer does not submit payment on time. So now you have to go off the beaten path or off the happy path to figure out, is this going to trigger, for example, a collections process? Do you have to actually go through some other steps? Is that where we might use AI? Because that is technically an exception that's in the process. Am I understanding that correctly?
And I think it depends on what kinds of exceptions, right? I mean, there are some exceptions that are, yes, they are exceptions, but they're not, you don't have a lot of exceptions cases to deal with. And the ones that you have to, it's pretty clear what you do with that exception. So I think, you can take a automation approach to even handling those exceptions. You can program those exception cases using traditional, programmatic forms of automation. But I think when the exceptions really require human reasoning, right, it's not very clear what to do,
Okay.
That's usually when we kind of say, well, some human being has to make a judgment call on this, right? If you have lots of data that can show how humans in the past have perhaps made judgment calls about similar things, then you can train a model to kind of infer how we think and reason about those decisions and do it for you. It won't be 100% right. It may be 90% right, but it'll capture a significant part of our subjective capability to reason about that issue.
Okay, I think I got it now. I understand.
Okay.
No, that was great because to your point, if it's not just a matter of, oh, this client did not, going back to the accounts receivable process example, it's not a matter of, oh, this client did not pay on time or this customer did not pay on time, so it triggers this collections process. It's, well, I actually, if it's a very specific situation where maybe that customer has gone out of business or something like that, which is
Right.
something that is completely outside of the quote unquote norm, that
Right.
does require a lot more thinking, cognitive thought, human intervention. That would be a candidate for AI to see,
Yeah.
hey, is there a tool out there that I can leverage that will help me figure out, based on what others have done in the past, I can maybe use ChatGPT or something like that to figure out, or at least get me on the right path of figuring out how to troubleshoot potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the two approaches. One is the machine learning approach that
Okay.
assumes that you have data, your own internal data about how those decisions have been made. And so basically you're just kind of capturing in the machine learning model, the AI, basically how your own people have handled that thinking and that reasoning. If you don't have that, then what you're, I think, alluding to more is that, well, can you perhaps from a larger universe of reasoning that is captured in, say, a public foundation model, something like a ChatGPT, can you get that model to sort of think about the problem and make a recommendation to you? And I think that's becoming a very real use case as these foundation models become more and more powerful and capture more and more sort of general purpose knowledge, right, about how we as human beings think about things.
Now, one of the things that I always enjoy whenever I have a conversation with you, Dean, is your ability to break down very complex topics into information that is very easy to understand and therefore relatable, and we understand how it actually applies to us as small businesses. Because a lot of times these use cases, as you just mentioned, they're usually centered around much larger enterprises. And so for us as small business owners and entrepreneurs, it can be difficult to understand whether or not this is technology that we can even properly leverage or utilize or integrate somehow into the work that we're doing in our respective companies. So to that extent, how can we being smaller business owners, evaluate whether AI can really help us in some of our day-to-day back office operations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer to it because well, first of all, AI is just this broad universe of things, right? Going all the way from old school expert systems to kind of regression and classification algorithms, all the way to this sort of newer kind of neural networking based generative AI stuff that's all the rage now with ChatGPT. So there's like a vast range of capability that's covered by that term AI, and sort of the legacy kind of AI, where essentially creating a function, a model from some that fits some data that you have, usually required you to go out and actually have a lot of data and train the model, right? So you have to show the model a lot of things, and then it would kind of figure out how to reproduce those patterns so that then you can show it something new, and it will give you a reasonable inference. But I think what's different now is that with these, especially these large language foundation models, is these things are so capable of they've captured so much human reasoning on so many subjects because of how they, just how much information they were trained on, that I think it's now possible for small business people to actually go to those models and get them to help with certain problems. And instead of having to fully train a chat GPT, which would be beyond the resources of any small or even medium-sized business, you can now sort of take these foundation models and do what's called one-shot training or multi-shot training. And essentially what it is basically by you just kind of having a conversation in a way with the model, and perhaps feeding the model some examples about something specific about your business, right? There's something specific about Alicia's business, and you want the model to understand that secret sauce that you do well, right? You only do well. Well, you don't have to start over. You can build on the model's large corpus of data it's been trained on, that's given it its reasoning capacity, and then you can start to sort of tell it the incremental difference. What else is it that you want to teach it about your small business? And now suddenly you've got what's called a fine-tuned model. And that fine-tuned model now knows about your business. It wasn't really very costly to fine-tune it because you didn't have to go train it from scratch. And now you can start to use that fine-tuned model in some way. So I do think small businesses, I do think these foundation models now really kind of democratize a lot of capabilities that were otherwise AI capabilities that would have just been completely inaccessible to small businesses. Now there's a whole bunch of risks that we have to recognize, that these things are not perfect and they make a lot of mistakes and they make up stuff. And, they call them hallucinations. I sort of hate that word because it almost sort of anthropomorphizes these models, and these models are not people, they are actually algorithms. Mm-hmm. But they make significant mistakes. And I think the biggest challenge that all business face right now, whether it's a small business or big business, with where AI is going, is how do you build trust in what the AI is telling you, right? How can I know? Because if I'm going to base my business decisions on it, I have to trust it, right? Now, I can trust you, Alicia. I know you're not going to be perfect. You are going to make mistakes, but I can have built a relationship with you to kind of know that in this certain area, I can trust, if I give Alicia this problem and she tells me this is what I should go left instead of right, she's thinking about that the right way. I know she understands what I told her. I think that's still the big challenge, because these models sort of lack transparency. That is, to tell us how they were trained, what kinds of biases, what kinds of gaps in training they have, right? And they lack explainability. That is, they're still, if Alicia, you say go left instead of right, and I say to you, why? Well, you'll give me a reasoned explanation for that, right? And then I can decide whether that makes sense to me. The models are still developing the capability to do that, right? To basically say, hey, I'm not just telling you this is what you should do, but I'm going to be able to explain to you why this is what is the right thing to do. And I'm going to be able to sort of bring the receipts too. I'm going to be able to show you what my reasoning is based on. And I think until that capability matures, and that's coming along, it's coming, the pace of development of this stuff is really quite stunning. So all of that is in the pipeline. But I think until those capabilities are mature, especially for small business people who are relatively unsophisticated, they're going to have a hard time knowing how to trust these models. I think that's going to be the biggest problem.
So I guess it's safe to say that many of us may not be early adopters, if you will, of some of these AI
Unfortunately, I think the truth is many of you will be early adopters and will
Maybe
feel
to
a
our
lot of
detriment.
pain from that
Yes.
from the early adopters.
Because it's hard to not take notice because it is everywhere. It seems
Yeah,
ubiquitous, and there's that bandwagon effect where
yeah,
you literally hop onto the bandwagon, and it's not necessarily that it will help you, increase your capacity in certain instances, or your ability to do more with fewer resources, or be able to significantly reduce the amount of time that it takes you to do something. So I think those are some of the key metrics to look at as well. Now, it's interesting listening to you talk about how the models lack transparency and explainability right now, but we know it will get better.
yes.
But as the technology gets better, Dean, so will the bad actors. The
All right.
people that, yes, so from a privacy perspective and cybersecurity, all of those kinds of things. If you had a crystal ball, what would be your prediction for the immediate future of AI and the future of work? So again, we know the technology is going to get better. It is going to become more sophisticated, more advanced. But again, so will the bad actors as well. What do you see in the immediate future? I would say let's say maybe in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I think the sort of destructive use cases, at least in the short term, will far outweigh the constructive use cases. In other words, I feel the bad actors and their ability to rapidly exploit AI in ways that increase risk for businesses. Right? Just think about it. Right now on the dark web, there's a service called Fraud GPT that will write all of your socially engineered hacking attacks for you using the latest social engineering methods that can evade detection of all of the protections that we have in place. And that's where we are least prepared, I think, as businesses or even as individuals, to really kind of protect ourselves against, whether it's deep fakes,
Yes.
right? And all sorts of kind of novel ways of exploiting us, exploiting all of the public information that is online about us, whether it's in the social networking areas and so on. There's just going to be a massive set of innovation, unfortunately, that is going to be very difficult, I think, for organizations to kind of cope with. So I sort of feel like the first place organizations need to focus when it comes to AI is how we can start to get a kind of an organized and disciplined set of practices within our organization about how we're going to try to protect ourselves from the malicious use cases. What are the malicious use cases? How could they affect us? Of course, they're evolving. We can't predict all of them, but because I think the risk scenarios are much larger than the benefit scenarios. And I know everybody writes about the benefit scenarios, and I know all the great articles you read about all the wonderful things that it can do for your business. And I think it has the promise to do many of those things, but before those things are real, there's a promise that it's going to do a lot of destructive things that you're going to be ill prepared to manage.
And I appreciate you talking about that, because you're right. It's so easy to become enamored and get caught up in that shiny object syndrome, right? Without having an understanding and appreciation for, as you mentioned, the risks that are involved with these types of technologies.
Yeah, and you also have to remember that with any technology, it's very new, especially new technologies, it's very easy to do pilots. Pilots are, it's kind of this 80-20 rule, right? It'll take you 20% of the time to get to 80% of the capability with a pilot, and then it'll be really exciting. Look at how quickly we were able to get that AI to do this thing for us. But that other 20% of the way to really make it actually fit for purpose for your use case can take you the 80% of the time. That's the difficult part, right? Going from pilot to production. And to go to production, you've got to handle all of those security cases and risk cases and all of that. The pilot, you didn't think about that. You were just showing wow, yeah, this capability is kind of there to do this. Wow, that's really interesting. Now, how do I make it so that my business can use it and rely on it day in, day out, and not suffer any negative consequences? That's hard.
That is hard, and especially as a smaller business owner, because when you, well, I'll share this really quickly as we start to wrap up here, but I went to a cybersecurity conference earlier this year, Dean, and walked away being so scared because of some of the things that vendors were sharing with me. And there was one vendor in particular, we followed up after the conference, and we got onto a Zoom call, they shared their screen, and they showed me, look, Alicia, this is how easy it is for me to find information about you on the dark web. And Dean, it went back as far as, I would say, like 2005. It had all of these passwords, things that I had not seen in years. A lot of the information was inaccurate, but a lot of it was also accurate as well. It was frightening. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, especially my team and I, we use many cloud-based technologies. And so I started asking, well, how can we protect it? How can we, because from a cost perspective, it's the better route for us to go because we don't have the deep pockets of the larger enterprises. So it is very scary, but I know that you're not sharing this information with the intent to instill fear in people. It's rather to educate and encourage people. Don't just dive in, do some research first and really figure out if this is something that if it will be more helpful or harmful. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And develop a plan. Don't just look at the bright, shiny use cases, right? But have a realistic view. Just ask yourself. I think everybody should think about some sort of risk framework that they can operate within, right? What are the risk tolerances of my business or a particular use case that I'm thinking about using this stuff for? Some applications are going to, the risks are going to be very, very low. The risk is just asking yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen? And there are going to be some use cases where the worst thing that can happen isn't all that bad. And the benefits outweigh those risks. And so it's worth dabbling and moving forward and experimenting and learning, because your competitors are going to do that, right? And you're going to have to be prepared to sort of keep pace with what's happening. But it's also really important to understand the other side of that there are going to be some risks that if you're not thinking about them seriously and you're not anticipating them, they could actually destroy your business or destroy your business's reputation. Right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that. So you have to be able to sort of think constructively and intentionally about those risk issues to really come up with a good plan for how to really exploit, get the benefits and avoid the risks. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And again, I know that you're not sharing this to scare any of us, but it is, if nothing else, a reality check. So, and I appreciate you sharing that so much. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end here, Dean. I know we can go on easily for another hour, but you've also made me wonder if we should do a separate episode just talking about the dark web, because I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs that may not even be aware that the dark web exists. So, but seriously, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and I appreciate it so much because you use a consultative approach as you answered all of these questions, because you're really kind of AI tool agnostic, if you will,
Yes.
and just really speaking about it from a consultative approach, making sure you're looking at the right factors before you kind of take the plunge regarding AI. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and we have even more great videos coming up for you. They'll include actual demonstrations of different AI tools that you can start using to improve the way your business operates. So make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of this information that's coming up. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.